Howdy. I'm Barney, old feller. Although the shade of the Palo Verdes along the Little Colorado were very welcome, I'm sure, after the dry, high desert that they had to cross, coming up from the south, headed towards St. George to have their marriages sealed. The early Mormon travelers. The Little Colorado made a very hard crossing sometimes. There were probably some places that were a little easier, but the whole thing is just mud. And if it was up at any time, if there was any floodwater, it would make it real hard. Sometimes they might have to wait until the water went down before they could get across. This was a long trip, and sometimes made longer by the weather. I like to take you along that road, show you just how it was, or give you an idea maybe. They'd pass through part of the Painted Desert, a big long area with very little vegetation. The minerals in the ground wouldn't allow anything to grow, and there was very little water except for rainfall. And it seemed to some who'd never made this trip that it was almost endless, making 20, 25 miles a day, dry camps, sometimes making less time than that. Depends on if the road had been washed out or something, or something else had happened. More wagons break down, and they hoped that the next camp, or the water hole, may have some water, and everything will be fine. But the trail never strayed too far from the Colorado River, the Little Colorado. It stayed as close as possible, and the road was built that way because the water was supply, something that they had to have. It was a necessity of life. Many had come all the way from Safford, south of the Gila and the Salt River, and by this time had already traveled for several weeks. And I'm sure some of the new brides probably thought, what in the heck have I let myself in for? Some places the road was really good. Some places you had to hunt for it. But there was a long valley as they got close to the Colorado. It's called the Echo Cliffs, right on the other side. On the east side of them, down here, this long valley, probably 30 miles long, and the traveling's a little easier. And there was water, and grass and stuff for their animals to feed upon, so it wouldn't be too rough on them. And they were traveling in the land of the Navajo. That is the old road. Not the original Honeymoon Trail, but it was built right alongside it. Sometimes it was a trail and sometimes it was a road. And like I say, sometimes it had to be filled in. And there were days' wait. The Colorado River had been conquered in a way. Of course, not like it is now. But at least there was a crossing. And there was a ferry. This was 1878. This was the main road from the New Zion, Utah. And they met those coming north to have their marriages sealed at the temple of St. George. They met with those already being sent to new towns on missions. Sent south to build Mormon communities, to colonize as much of Arizona territory as possible. Religion required strict discipline. These people had already suffered from the hands of the people back east. They'd been persecuted and driven from Missouri and Illinois. Brigham Young and the other leaders promised that Utah was the promised land, the New Zion, and the whole Southwest eventually. So the colonization, the South and the West, was of prime importance. This is the old Honeymoon Trail. Now that's the road, if you can believe it. And this is the road. So there was plenty of company on this trail, although it doesn't look like a heck of a lot. It had traveled by an awful lot of people, an awful lot of Mormons. This was used as a freight route to haul things down to the south, and also to bring things back up to Utah, as well as for those moving north to have their marriages sealed. They had settled places like Moenkopi, an old abandoned Hopi village, which didn't take too well. It didn't work. I guess the Hopis knew what they were doing when they abandoned it. Sunset Crossing, it later became Winslow. Joseph City, Holbrook, St. John's, Springerville, Show Low, Heber, Snowflake, and a whole bunch of others that didn't make it. But it wasn't because they didn't try. This is actually the only part of this road that is still in existence today that can be traveled. It's on the Navajo Reservation on the southeast side of Grand Canyon, or the beginnings of Grand Canyon, here at Lee's Ferry. The Mormon people were people who thrived on discipline and rules, who did as close as possible to what they were told to do, with strong family ties. They were a type who needed leaders, such as Brigham Young, who actually ruled almost as a monarch. They were not told there's a valley in a certain area to the south that we have scouted, and it would be a good place for a settlement. Why don't you go down there and see what you can do? They were not told that way. They were told there's a valley to settle. You're on a mission from the church, and it is your duty, and your duty to God and church. In this way, they felt they must make a go of this new community, no matter how difficult or inhospitable it might be. And this worked. There's a certain amount of people who need this discipline. I'm afraid it's sadly lacking in our society nowadays, in most of the rest of society. Although the Mormon still practices it, and it works, and they still have strong family ties. Old Jacob Hamlin, he was a kind of a man, he was a mountain man, and he was an explorer and a scout, and he became known as Old Jacob at a very young age. People would ask him, so where you been? Oh, I've been here and there. Been down to the Indians, scouting, talked to Chief Huskanini, and making things smoothing the troubles out before they happen. He was an explorer who never stopped for long in one place. The type that had to see was on the other side of the mountain and remembered what he saw. He was a big man, strong man, much respected for his counsel. And he was the right-hand man of Brigham Young, and he was considered very wise. He laid out this road. He traveled it many times before he decided. In places you drive, right out on the edge of these red bluffs. But there's enough room there for a wagon to go by. Sure as heck could be enough room for us. What do you think? Now here we'll turn and we'll go right out on the edge again and skirt just the edge of the bluff. The only trick about this is don't look down. It's a beautiful country. And this river is the most gorgeous. The colors of the Colorado, it stays a blue-green. It must be the mineralization or something in it. I don't know what it is. But it is fantastic. We could go a little farther, and we surely will. But right here, I want to show you something. Come here, I'll show you something. On the other side is the old historic buildings, where an awful lot of history has been made. Gold mining, which could have worked if they had the modern chemicals and the things that we use nowadays. It abounds. Big trout. Pink meat. The water's very cold, because it comes out just a few miles above under the Glen Canyon Dam. It stays between 48, sometimes in winter 46. That's pretty cold. You don't want to swim in it, not anymore. There are some places untouched by man, still in the Grand Canyon. This is the old crossing. This is the first crossing. This was south of the rapid, in between another set of rapids there. This way, if you took this crossing, you didn't have to go over Lee's Backbone. Lee's Backbone was at least a one-day trip, and the people on the other side of the river could see you all the way, because it was hairy and rough and scary. Now this, you can see, is built up strictly of rocks and filled in with dirt. There were no excavations, very little dynamite used in blowing anything away. And it won't be too long that this will be reclaimed completely by nature. As you go around this bend where I'm at here, the road deteriorates further, and it's just a pathway. Now everybody preferred to use this crossing, if it was possible. Keep from going over Lee's Backbone, because I mean it scare you to death. And you had to be hardy and well-disciplined. Oh, goodness. Anyway, in high water, you couldn't get over this because there was no place to land. There was no place to get your wagon on. In low water, there was a small landing, an area where you could get your wagon out of there. Now, if it was a car, you hadn't a chance in the world. And it was used a long time for cars. Probably 20 years of its life, seen nothing but car and truck traffic. And a few Indian wagons then, because just as soon as the automobile was available, people left their horses and their wagons at home. This lower crossing is a little bit scary. Of course, anytime you cross the Colorado River, it's scary. That big flat rock was where the anchor went, the cable went to hold, to give you a guide to go across. Well, let's follow the road on up and see how far we can go. If we don't drive off the edge of one of these bluffs. Oh, I guess it's about a 150-foot drop. I hope this sandstone holds up. Been in use an awful long time. Jacob must have really known what he was doing. He must have been a civil engineer, somebody who could lay out roads without a sextant, who could see the natural way to travel. And it's remarkable that this road worked out so well, because the main road travels. The road now, built by modern civilization, follows right along beside it. So they didn't find a better way. But Jacob He knew what he was doing. Well, it appears, appears to me that we're about to run out of road. Unless we want to drive Lee's backbone. Can you imagine the stamina of these people? 1878, even we're clear back to 1874 when they first started it. I think you'd have to do an awful lot of talking to a girl to get her to ride with you in a wagon all the way to St. George. She said, what's wrong with us just being married by the bishop? The heck with this long road. So why don't we go back now? Of course, now some of these women and men have been married for a long, long time. And they had half a dozen kids. And they finally got around to going to Utah, having their marriages sealed. And I suppose it was a good thing. What are we going to find on the other side of this? The river or some more road? Yeah, it looks like road. Okay, it looks like we're here. This is where the road goes up the hill, over Lee's backbone. Of course it was the easiest road south. It required little maintenance. Do you realize this road was traveled from 1871 till 1929. 60 years. Can you imagine that? With very little change. Fantastic. I'll come up here about as far as I can go. I don't think I'd try this on a motorcycle. Of course, after they'd made their trip coming across the ferry and over Lee's backbone, they must pitch camp pretty quick. Of course, in the early days, there could have been some mountain lions skulking around, maybe looking to see maybe there's a young calf or somebody's dog. Oh well, they got to eat too. Let me show you this. This is the fantastic thing I ever did see. And as far as I know, it only grows in this area. This is what I call a bride's bouquet. Everyone, one little taproot pulls up very easily to give you a nice little handle, and it is very pleasant smelling. And it looks just like a little bouquet. With heart-shaped blossoms and leaves. And it only grows here on the Honeymoon Trail. Those are pretty. Those are beautiful. They're just as soft as silk. Just velvety touch. They're really something. I've never seen anything like it. And we can go no further on this side of the river. We're going to pick it up on the other side and follow it all the way to Pipe Springs. Pipe Springs from there on up is just a hop and a skip. Old Jacob must have known what he was doing. Well, after getting across the Colorado River, after taking that scary ride, on ferry, I imagine that was really something. You can see right alongside the main road, going beside the Vermilion Cliff, remnants of the old Honeymoon Trail. If you look toward the center of the picture, between the rocks, you can see the flat area and the old wagon rut in the distance. It's well marked, and I hear tell, or every so often, I don't know if it's every year, they reenact this and bring some wagons over this road, this very road. Here's a good shot of it. It shows you it's eroding some. The main thing they took with them whenever they left the Colorado River was water. And this is an area known as Jacob's Well. Pilots of each little expedition had to know where the springs were, where the water was, because that was the most important. You could go a long ways without some grub. Couldn't go very far without water. This area here, where it crosses Soap Creek, was one of the worst, because it was often washed out. The trip is usually made at the best time of the year, which would be in the very early fall. You don't want to wait too long to make this trip, because you might get caught in the snow up on the plateau, because you had to climb the northern end of the Carbide Plateau. And here at Jacob's Well, Marble Canyon, was the last place to get water until you got around the tip of the edge into House Rock Valley. And that was the longest stretch without water that they had. But it was all fairly level, and if they didn't have any road building to do, or washouts, anything really bad happened, then it was a good, safe trip. And in the fall, in the early fall, it wouldn't be too hot. And there would be feed for the cattle. You can see in the distance, across the Colorado River, Echo Cliff. Now they had made that all along the Echo Cliff, and then way over to the right, or to the left, and there's the Vermilion Cliff, which they skirted. Now the road follows close to the cliff, all the way up House Rock Valley, which at that time was pretty well all this land here was run by the Mormons. Everything north of the Colorado River was theirs. There were no other people here. And those that were, or tried to settle in here, life was made either too uncomfortable, and so they usually moved on. And I think it's still much the same way right now. This is the last water, or this is the water they've been looking for. So, but this is the last water before they go up over the plateau and head over towards Kanab. But pretty soon, it'll go up, and they'll begin to get into a almost alpine forest. With game, and maybe a little bit of time if they've made good time. Maybe camp here for a day or two in one of these meadows. At that time, Kaibab Plateau supported a deer herd of over 500,000, over 500,000 deer. They didn't have the cattle to compete with that they do nowadays. There was overgrazing, to be sure, just like always, like there always has been ever since there's been cattle. But there was room made for the deer. And until recently, well, I call it recently, but that has to be within the last 40 years. Before that time, there was a tremendous herd of deer. And they might stock up on a little because they probably hadn't had any fresh meat since they left home. Well, after a day or two's rest, and maybe stocking up on some venison, they head off of the plateau, high up on the northern end. They've almost completed their journey. Finally, Pipe Springs, a good watering stop, a stop for all travelers, because it's the best water in this part of the country. It's built as a fort to protect against the Indians, the Paiutes, and sometimes an occasional rambunctious Navajo. But from here, it's on to St. George and the Sealing of the Americas. They'll rest a while and then head back. Some of them maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. But they shouldn't stay too long. It's late in the fall, and the storms the winter storms have started, and they could get in some pretty bad snow as they cross over the plateau on their way back. And the desert, the high desert, can be bitterly cold in the wintertime. But when they get back home, they'll have memories. Memories that the brides can tell their children and their grandchildren. The winter storms have started.